Good evening. Whether you're watching in this room or viewing online, thank you for joining live from NYPL. My name is Tony Marks, and I'm the president of the New York Public Library. We're here tonight to celebrate this amazing space, this new building, this completely transformed Stavros Niarchos Foundation Library. It is an absolute gem that was envisioned by the team you're going to hear from tonight, by the amazing creative minds of Francine Houben, the founding partner and creative director of Mecanoo, and Liz Leber, the managing partner of Beyer Blinder Belle. Since its opening, this building has just been embraced here at the crossroads of New York. We'll go through it. We're going to talk about it, but just you come in the afternoons and the teen center is bursting with life, and the kids center, and you move up the building. People are outside on this terrace. It's unbelievable. You know, the whole building, the largest circulating library available in Manhattan, all of it was envisioned by the two incredible women you're going to hear from tonight. And now, as you come through it, it's just like magic that it's come to life. I mean, Iris and I were saying as we came in, you know, we remember the virtual people in the graphics. And now they're like, you walk in and they're sitting exactly as the architects thought they would. It's like, it's unbelievable. You know, I go by this building every day. Sometimes I come by it at night. The light is on, and the people are sitting at the long table on Fifth Avenue, just like you guys said they would. And it's like the most magic thing on Fifth Avenue, right? The commerce is closed, people are hustling and bustling, and there's this warm, bright, inviting, magical place where people are coming together to learn and to think, to advance themselves. It's amazing. And it's amazing in partnership with the Schwartzman building across the street. We've really created and are continuing to construct a campus here at the crossroads of New York to bring together the most used research library on the planet with the crown jewel branch library, central library for New York City, with the traffic going back and forth, just as Andreas and everyone always imagined. It's such a testament to the idea that you can envision and make real. But of course, that's only possible with help, powerfully guiding help. For that, we're so grateful to the Stavros Niarchos Foundation, their gift that made this possible, but not just the gift, but Vasily and the whole team, some of whom are here, Andreas, of course, really rolling up their sleeves and envisioning a cultural learning center for New York. And then helping, again, with the vision of the architects to make it possible. Then there's the staff that actually executed it brilliantly, led by Iris Weinschel here, Risa and the whole team just doing amazing work. And then handed off to Brian Bannon and the whole team, Billy, everyone who's here. And every day they make it full of life. It is truly magical. Also only possible because of the guidance and perseverance of the trustees. We have two here this evening. So huge thanks. Susan and Manaz, Susan Morgenthau, Manaz is Pahani Bartos. Their leadership, the trustees' leadership, persevered through some difficult days to get us here to this incredible result. And I do just want to give a shout out that on the 23rd, we'll be having another event for another trustee in honor of Judge Katzman, so I hope some of you can join us for that. Today, as I've said, we're joined by Francine and Liz in conversation with Columbia professor Barry Bergdoll. Francine and Liz are going to give a short talk about the building. We'll get to conversation. There are note cards on your seat. If you want to put in questions, please, we'll come around for them. If you're watching online, you can submit your questions to public programs, plural, one word, public programs at nypl.org. I also, of course, want to thank for their continuing generosity the late Celeste Bartos, and of course, Manaz Ispahani Bartos and Adam Bartos for making Live from NYPL possible, but also for making this special event for the library, for its history at this moment, in honor of these exceptional architects and of the library having these women in our visionary leadership. Thank you for that. Thank you all for your support. And now please join me in welcoming Francine, Liz, and Barry.
Good evening. I'm deeply pleased and honored to have been asked to be here tonight to talk about one of my favorite subjects with people that I admire greatly who have just given an incredible gift to Manhattan and to New York, and for me as an architectural historian to the history of building libraries. I just want to say one thing before we start, which I think will frame a bit the discussion that I'm looking forward to having with both of you after you take us through the process and your thoughts that brought this building back to life, and as Tony Marks just told us, to a life that it's almost a kind of symbol of overcoming COVID to come to this place that is operating in such a public vibrancy and making it possible to talk and do things, to both read a book but also to discuss with friends and the public. It occurred to me, I was thinking about tonight, that around 30 years ago, when I was actually a doctoral student, the National Libraries of Britain and France were being rebuilt, and there was a huge discussion. The digital revolution is the end of the library. It's irrelevant to build libraries any longer. The public library, as we have known it historically, is an artifact of the past. Clearly, given the number of spectacular new library buildings that the 21st century has brought us, and I could rattle off a whole list, and a large number of them would have been brought into being by Francine, clearly that prediction was completely wrong. So we're here tonight to talk about a wrong prediction and to celebrate the revitalization of this building and the extension of the New York Public Library. So I'm going to hand it over to both of you to present slides and to take us through the project.
Thanks, Barry. Very happy to be here. We're going to launch into a very quick whirlwind tour of the building that I hope you all had a chance to see as you were making your way up to the 7th floor. But as we're going to start with you are here in the middle of Midtown Manhattan. To just back out and say that this project is part of the brilliantly conceived by NYPL Midtown Campus renovation. This was not just one, but it was two projects. It was the Stephen A. Schwartzman Building and the Mid-Manhattan Library. And the vision was to bring these two together in ways programmatically, architecturally, geographically, if not physically, with a tunnel under Fifth Avenue, although we did contemplate it for a second, but to connect those two buildings. And they also had the foresight to hire us. So Francine and I have been working together for 7 years on this project, from competition to completion of this building, and our continuing work, and with our amazing team, some of whom are here. And of course, Francine from Mecanoo, known as a libraries expert, brought that expertise not only to us, but also to Washington, D.C., and to Birmingham, England, and to her own Delft, and then joined with us at Beyer Blinder Belle, where we have the expertise in taking care of some of the most iconic buildings in New York City. Carrera and Hastings certainly created one of those iconic buildings in 1911, built with, not on, the foundations of the Croton Reservoir, with the vision by its own director at the time, Billings, who had this idea of a magnificent reading room over 7 floors of stacks and said to Carrera and Hastings, build it, and they built it in the Beaux-Arts manner. And what people don't really realize when they look at these two buildings is that they were built within 4 years of each other. Across the street was the Arnold Constable Building. When department stores were making their way up to Fifth Avenue from Ladies Mile, it was the third department store to make its way up here. And so they are cousins in a way, at least in terms of chronologically. And the Arnold Constable store that was built in 1915 certainly was worse for its wear in 1961 when NYPL bought it, and in 1978 renovated it, and it turned into the Mid-Manhattan Library that I hope that many of you remember and loved in its own way, or at least had memories of. The idea of having a master plan was to make sure that the program was thought of holistically across the two buildings, that we were thinking about a journey of lifelong learning that starts from when you're a child, moving the children's library from the Stephen A. Schwartzman building here to the SNFL, all the way up to when we were replacing the SIBL, the Science, Industry, and Business Library, bringing business here so that you have a journey of adult learning and starting your own business, and it's all housed under one hat, which you'll hear more about. On the other side of the street, we were thinking about listening to the logic of a Beaux-Arts building and clarifying a lot that you will all see as it sort of secretly makes its way through construction. It's all happening behind the walls there now across the street. Hints of it have started with the information desk that we did early on in Astor Hall, as well as the amazing Polanski exhibit, the Treasures exhibit, which has been open. And stay tuned for more on the other side of the street. But now I'm going to turn it over to Francine to focus on this building.
Thank you, Liz. As you told, it's still everything, a lot of under construction over now on the other side of the street. And it's amazing what's happening there, but nobody can see it. But I was here with Tony, so we're making there new elevators, new stairs, and all these things. It's amazing what's happening there. But it also remembers me, this was the very first sketch we made when we did the competition, that I had this idea to make a new entrance also on 40th Street, to make a relationship between this building, this sketch we made from this building to the other building, that we would relate them to each other, and also to make a new entrance so that as part of the journey of learning, lifelong learning, this was also a stepping stone to make a very easy connection between the two buildings. And for me, this is a picture we made very recently. It's really happening now. If you see the construction on 40th Street, they're making it. You know, this will be the new extra entrance. Where there used to be 2 windows, we make a new door, and it also feels that Bryant Park will go all around the building in the future. And this is, people will not, now this at the moment, this is the loading dock, but this is the entrance for staff, for researchers, and all the goods. It won't happen anymore in the future. I thought maybe it's fun to show you this little movie. Talking about Mid-Manhattan Library, this building was like this. You can almost not imagine that anymore. So this was during the design process. The whole building was filled with high shelving systems. This was the ground floor, the street level. But it was full of people, everywhere.
Along that, if you really want
There was one escalator.
The sun is shining this way.
The building did smell, to be honest. But at the same time, it was very well used. It was very used. Especially attention always to the restrooms and the stairs that used to be there. And here we go on top of the roof, and that's for me typically United States. The best view is for the mechanical equipment, always, the penthouses. So I wanted to change that. We also did that in Washington. And here you see what we dare as Dutch people. We just watch. I think it's not allowed, but we needed to do this. But what was typical for this building, it has a very strange floor plan. So this is, you see, 5th Avenue and 40th Street, but it has what I call the long arm. It was the loading dock to serve this building, a department store. And of course, also typical American, there was a pocket park to make a high rise in front of it. But for me, it was amazing that all the people working here had no idea that there was a pocket park behind them. So my idea was, I want to make windows there. Another thing what is very typical, so we had to keep the bones of the building. And but there were so many, I do something wrong, there were so many columns in the building. I thought, what the hell to do with all these columns? And another thing was very, Tony promised, I don't know who, but he promised that he will bring back the same amount of books that were in the building. But if we would put them everywhere, all floors would be filled with books. Yeah, that's not a good idea. So what we did, and you can see it on this scheme, the long room became a kind of stacks. That was the idea, and we make a void in between because we wanted to create spaces that people can study and sit on tables. This was the inspiration, because also for me it was important to make from a department store really a library. What we did in Library of Birmingham, we made this, the book rotondas, or the library in Delft, we made the hanging shelving system. And this was the idea of the long room of Trinity College, to make it like that. So this was the section of the building. And in architecture, a section is maybe the most important thing. So what we did, so this was a rather mediocre building. It was not a special building. But this is what we made out of it. We created a lower ground floor, I call it, a lower level. I don't want to call it a basement or a cellar. To make it with two voids for the teenagers and the children. We created, that's very important, to deal with the books. We made a void and made out of 5 floors with bookshelving. On top of that, we made a learning center. We combined 2 floors for that. And on top of it, what I call the wizard head. Here you see the wizard head. And you can also see it's inspired by all the buildings around us. Most of the buildings in this area are built all at the same time. Beaux-Arts time, the Beaux-Arts period, with special rooftops. So I also want to make a rooftop. And you know what to do with the columns? If you make out something negative, make something positive. Celebrate them. So this is what we did. If you enter the building, it's almost like a street, and we gave all the column color and put uplights on it that's celebrating that you can come in. And we put the desk at the end, because if you put a desk in the front, it's like a police agency. But we want people to come in, solve their own problems, and if you can't solve your problem, you go to the desk. And just to tell you, what is always the most asked question in a building at the desk is, where are the toilets? So we made it very clear where the toilets are. Another thing, what we did with the columns is start to use them to hang tables. So this is the kind of, how do you call it? Showcase the books. But it's hanging between the 2 columns. Another thing was, like what also Tony just said, we really wanted to create a kind of meeting point here in New York. Let's meet at the long table on 5th Avenue. Or in the other corner, what is a kind of a little event space for, there's now also now there was also a small event, or to put a Christmas tree here, or this is a kind of changing corner. Also what we did, we kept the old stairs. You can see them over there. But what we did, we made, because I felt in the United States, they always feel, for me, horrible, all these stairs, like really fire escape. So we made them all with glass doors that you can also, we want to create a walkable building. The voids, this is a teenage area. So the teenagers really have their own stairs going down, and with getting the daylight from 5th Avenue down, with the beautiful, all the kind of labs around it, with nice graphics, specially made for them. The children area, also with their own void, because never mix up teenagers with children. The teenagers don't like that. They have their own space, but also this in the niches little nooks what are acoustically nooks for, if you feel a little bit uncomfortable. And it's so well used if I'm there. But also what was, of course, very important to make the window to show the children, if you give back the book, that you can see where the book is going to. It's not only nice for children, I can tell you. I think everybody loves it. But it's also very nice for people working there, because I was amazed at how many people work in the US in dark spaces. So it's also nice for people working here. It's the book sorter, that they can look back who they are working for. This was maybe the most complicated thing, I think, during construction. This idea to make the void, to make out of 3 floors, 5 floors. So that was kind of complicated in an existing building, but they did it well, I think. And here you can see what we did. We did open up the windows to the pocket park. That's where you see the red wall. So I think the building feels very much healthy or well ventilated, or I think it feels very pleasant. And also showing the bookshelving system, the stacks on one side and the study area on the other side. And of course, you should be very much aware, as Liz explained, we have been working at all things at the same time, and we made 3 teams. One team was dealing with the master plan, one team was dealing with what we call CESB, the Central Library, the Stephen A. Schwarzman building, and the other one was working on MML. But I was working on all 3 of them. But, for me, that building did influence this building. The stacks, of course, is an inspiration also for the long room, like you can see here. Although this here is not structural, it's accessible, and it's even flexible for the future. Here's with the picture we made with the Mecanoo team that was here 3 weeks ago in the stacks. Also the long tables that we created, hanging on the columns, is a kind of reflection of the long tables of the Rosemary Reading Room. And even creating the special ceiling, what is designed by Hayal Pazonti, is also reflecting the special ceilings in that building. But even we did design new chairs for this building, is also reflecting that building. Here, and also you can see on every floor is different, and the long tables, the longest table is here on this floor. It's almost, I think, 100 feet. That's nice, Also what's very important, also the sketches we made, is that we made all the perimeter seating. The idea was that you look back to the Schwarzman building, but also back to Fifth Avenue, so that you kind of get a visual connection between the 2 buildings. The study area, we created the business library. We created a different atmosphere, more business-like. Also here it has carpet. The other floors have terrazzo. But also very important, if you go higher up, is more the learning center, where we made it a little bit more a homey atmosphere with a lot of classrooms, where people can learn English as a second language or can take computer lessons. This was for me very special. Here you can see, if you look very well to the construction here, what we did elevate this floor. Why did we do this? Because we want people to look over the parapet back to the city. And also you can see this inspiration that the rooftop of the other building was the inspiration for the wizard's hat. For me, this was really amazing how this was made. Maybe for you this is very normal, but this for me was like, hey, this is the United States, the way they built. Because in the Netherlands, we would not build it like that. But I loved it. It was so beautiful. But here you can see, and what Tony always said, Manhattan's only free publicly accessible roof terrace. But you can also see the zoning we did. Like this is higher, then the public terrace is a little bit lower. So that creates a kind of bench that you can sit. If there's a lot of people, they can sit all on the bench. And of course, we also have the chairs. But also this little detail that we colored also all the light elements, the lamps, that it feels almost like a decoration, like you also do in these Beaux-Arts roof buildings. Here you can see it in the evening. It's so, I heard, last Friday, nice party here, and that it was amazing. Of course, this area where you are here, but also why we did create this ceiling, because we wanted to give you the feeling that you're in the wizard hat, that it's a special ceiling and not just a flat ceiling. Here you can see it, and how you can play with the layers of the windows, the layers of the two different kinds of curtains. Also, it's protecting you from the rain, from the sun, and from the snow, so you can always use it. And I always like that you look back to the void where Bryant Park is and the Central Library, the Stephen A. Schwarzman building. Here, this is a nice picture from the recently made by a Dutch photographer from a helicopter. But here you see the composition. We had to deal with of course, also all the legal things with the neighbors, but we solved it together. Connecting the two buildings visually as one atmosphere, as one campus, I think was extremely important. And I just also want to thank the female leadership of this project. We had dinner last night, and I think it was amazing that we did it in time, on budget, or I never know if it's on time and in budget or on time. That's
All
my...
those things. It's okay.
It's all okay? But it was, I think we did it uniquely all together. Also it was really decision making, and I think we all together made the right decisions. So thank you for that. And just my last picture, because as you all know, I like to bike. I'm Dutch. And also I have one little question to all of you. Of course, it's named the Stavros Niarchos Foundation Library. But what is it? SNFL? SNFL? What is it? Or is it still the Mid-Manhattan? Or what is it? But I love to come here, and I'm extremely happy to come here every time on my bike or just walking. But also became for me a kind of meeting place. Like if I have an appointment here, somebody, oh, let's meet in this building. So it's really working well. So thank you.
I think it's hard to launch in after such a superb presentation. It makes us actually all want to run out the door and enjoy the building. And I think in many ways the building is a bit like you two, very understated, but incredibly clever and ingenious in many of the things that it stages. That gap space, which I think most people just walk over, is so incredible. But I wanted to be a little bit structured and ask you a couple questions with my architectural historian's hat on. And then while you were presenting, I was thinking there is something about this library that is unlike almost any other library, and that is the engagement with the city. Because libraries, I think, are built on paradoxes. In part, they're built on the fact that they're both about the public, but you don't come always to a library to be with other people. So the other people could be a hindrance, as well as you could have a meeting here. Historically, views of the city were considered distracting, but yet you've made that the most wonderful part of this building. So I wanted to start because the first time I came, when the building finally opened, we've been waiting. COVID was slowing it down. I know you two were frustrated that your creation wasn't immediately put online. But the choice to have wonderful photographs by some very famous photographers of the history of libraries that are displayed throughout the building. Now, you did show Trinity College Dublin and others, but I was wondering, I don't know whose choice that was, but to me, they send a message about putting this library in some descent from a great history of libraries. And I wondered what you learned from previous libraries and what you thought about must not be continued in a library in the 21st century. Either of you, since this was a collaborative project.
You can start.
I can start. I learned from, I've seen so many libraries, I can tell you. Every city I go, I always also visit a library. And I always try to observe how people use the library. So what is interesting, like you're often there as an individual person. You like to be part of a bigger community. So a lot of people like to sit just watching the street or watching a void, or like why we created these long tables that you are together, but at the same time you have enough distance to have your kind of privacy. I think that really works. And what I would not repeat from other libraries is that there's still a big dogma, maybe among the big audience, but even a bit among a lot of architects, that libraries are just about books. It's not true. And I think it's also so much interest, but of course, at the same time, the books are important. They are beautiful, but it's also part of what we did here, creating a whole, nice stage setting and environment, and it's very pleasant. But you can see, I'm also observing how this library is used. A lot of people are. I always say you should even, the library should be so nice that you even bring your own book from home and go and read it at the library. So it's much more a space.
Well, I think that's one of the most interesting things when you look at all of those photographs. Many of the ones that are chosen are what historians have called display libraries. So the problem of an enormous number of books, and you want somehow to make the books into the decoration of the library. The famous design for the French National Library by the architect Boulle right around the time of the Revolution. He wanted actually to make it appear as though the building was literally built of the books. And so you were counting that the same number of books came back in, and they're put in a much tighter, different type of space, which is an act of genius. But you've actually therefore created a 21st century display library in which the scale of the presentation of the books already sends the message, all knowledge is here. And then the scale of those tables sends that this isn't a quagmire of little individual enterprises, but a public concern. Still, it seems to me that it's an incredibly difficult balancing act, even if you throw a red carpet to the front door, which is wonderful. But I think that, when you've spoken about the wonderful library you did in Birmingham in the UK, and you refer to it as the People's Palace, so I think that's a theme. Here again, we're in a People's Palace. But the one thing you didn't talk so much about in your presentation is the role of the computers and all the other access to information here that was so much the debate 30 years ago about what would the library look like in what was then the coming century. So it seems all the more important in a world in which it seems to me computers have tended to separate people from one another, something we learned acutely in these last 2 years on Zoom and Ring Central and things like that, people who had the luxury of working from home. And I'd like to hear you elaborate a bit, both of you, on the idea of the People's Palace in relation to the New York Public Library campus, and specifically on the difference between the two buildings. I think perhaps Carrere and Hastings thought they were creating a palace of research, but maybe they wouldn't have called it the People's Palace. And I like something that you alluded to, the notion that one of the paradoxes of the library is that it's about reading alone in public.
Yeah. I mean, go to any coffee shop now and you'll see people doing a lot of things alone in public. When we walked the building today for a tour, people were doing many things that had nothing to do with books, had nothing to do with the collections here, but they chose to be here because I feel like it's an atmosphere that's welcoming for people to do a lot of different things together. And that is something that I think even more recent generations have really embraced. And why shouldn't a library, a space that you don't have to pay for anything when you walk in the door, not be that kind of place? And I don't think that's what Carrere and Hastings envisioned when they created the space across the street. And of course, a research library and a circulation library are two different beasts, and they have to be treated in two different ways. But I think even the subtle ways, the very, very careful and loving ways that we're opening up the Stephen A. Schwartzman building to the public in a different way, and that's going to be evolving over the next year or two. But even putting an entrance that is not up at the hallowed steps, everybody ascends the hallowed steps, that we're creating an entrance on 40th Street, an entrance that eventually will be enlivened with research and teaching spaces, that it's about creating a quiet amount of really subtle changes that are going to transform the experience of that building, I think, less from a temple of knowledge to more the type of space that curators and libraries want to welcome people into. And I think that's in the spirit of the library.
It's interesting. I want to hear Francine on this too, but it's interesting that the two journeys are so different. The journey of 1911 is a journey, even if it's going to the grandest space, it's going to the space where you walk into that space and it tells you, be quiet. You know that it's supposed to be respectful and that you're supposed to find your place there. And the windows are up high enough that you might see what the weather is, but you're not distracted by thinking about the city rather than thinking about what you're meant to be concentrating on. I personally like to have my desk near a window. I find I concentrate better when there is a view than when I think I need to walk to find it. But here, this journey that ends up in the terrace, I mean, opening up the roof is the whole point of the journey, because you leave the city, you go through this all of these possibilities that you've created, and then you reconnect with the city in a different way. You kind of look back to where you came in the building from. But I'd like to hear more from you, Francine, about that balance. How do you create the balance of a social function of a library and the desire of many of its users for a kind of hushed atmosphere? Bring together the social and the,
yeah, but also
the
maybe
quiet.
I was thinking of your to reflect, about the Carrera and Hastings building and this buildings, but also you have to be aware that a lot of buildings, even the Mies van der Rohe building we did in Washington, were very much to impress people, not to be welcoming, but to impress them, and I thought a lot of people maybe think if you enter these kind of buildings, what were from a certain period and maybe until the 70s. Like, I'm not intelligent enough to enter this building. And that, of course, is also part of that building. And also, I think what is also part of the building of Carrera and Hastings, I love that building, so I don't want to complain about it, but you have to be aware, it's almost designed as, this is very critical, a rich male person has his own room with all books around him. And of course we have the problem, for instance, in that building, what is almost like, the collection is almost like a museum, so you also have to deal how to protect the books. That kind of thing is difficult over there. We have a lot of shelving, but we have a lot of books that we cannot showcase in that way anymore, because it's a collection that we have to protect, and we have to keep it in a climatized way. So it's a kind of complicated. But also I think what's extremely different, what we try to do with all the libraries we do, that everybody feels welcome. And that's maybe also what I said in Birmingham, it should be People's Palace. And that it should also feel that often these public buildings are also paid by the public. And maybe that's here in the UK, US a little bit different. But that people also feel, hey, this is not designed for the architects. No, it's designed for them. I think that's really what we did together. And I hope people feel it that way and experience it that way. And I think I think that's for me extremely important.
It strikes me that the early 20th century notion, of course, it was from the beginning a research library compilation of very important libraries that had been formed over the 19th century into this kind of super research treasure house. And the idea is, even in that big room, that you can separate yourself from the world in order to focus on the page, what you're thinking about, the way that you're, connecting various things you might put in, if anybody remembers a call slip for. Whereas in in a library in which the digital is as important as the books, it is about interconnectivity to the world. I mean, the computer as a screen to connect to all sorts of networks seems somehow, to me, there's something almost poetic in the fact that every place in this building you also connect again to the outside world. You connect to the city you're in. And many people who come here, I imagine, I'd like to also talk a bit about who these users are, as much as we can know them in a public space. But many of the people who come here are not coming here necessarily to read a whole book. They have all sorts of other needs and desires that that they can extend here.
And I think maybe it also fits in, often I know it from, because like when I was not when I was a student, but many years ago, like teenagers didn't go to a library. Nowadays they are coming. And it's a little bit part of, sometimes of the rhythm to how to define when they study. Sometimes it's also important because maybe their parent, they don't have a good home at home to study, or that they are not allowed, a lot of women are not, young women are not allowed to go out, but they are allowed to go to the library. So it's a very, what they call the third place. It's really happening. And you can not only see it here in the UK, in the US, but also in the UK and in the Netherlands or in Taiwan. So that it becomes a very important place, public place, where you feel safe and welcome, and but that also stimulates you to study or to focus. I think that's extremely important, and it works.
You said in one conversation we had on the phone when we were planning to meet here this evening that although you've made many libraries, every one is very specific to its place. I wonder what is specifically New York about this library?
What is specific New York? Yeah. What is specifically? The energy. And I think that is also what I feel, that I think that the energy, what's in the city, is also coming into this building and how all these people use the building. That's how I experience it. And as I told you, for me, it's very much influenced by the other building. What I said, long tables, all the kind of aesthetics, or if that's with the idea of our campus, that we want to bring the two buildings together. I would never have designed it like this if we were not working on the other one. So that's really, for me, that's also very much New York. I always felt that the Central Library is maybe one of the most loved buildings by all New Yorkers. And I hope that that will also a little bit happen here.
I think it is. I think what's interesting is New Yorkers, I mean, in a lot of major urban areas this is true, but I was thinking about it in the era that we're in now that the subways are busier again, that people just sit cheek by jowl and we accept a sort of level of density in this city. And we also accept a level of porosity, that we're a much less insular community, that people come and people go through New York, and in our own way, I think we embrace that. And the library is doing the same thing. When we started to design the long tables, you know, we had talks about how wide they should be and how close the tables and, you know, how close the chairs should be. And what amazes me is, and comforts me, is that even now when you walk through the library, people are sitting, you know, you don't skip every other chair. People are just sitting one after another, you know, like they're on a subway, and everybody's just doing their own thing. And I think that there's less of a sense of a territoriality in our library, and that there's a place for everybody, and a kind of acceptance that people will find their space just like they find their space in the library, but also that we are paying quiet attention to making sure that it feels inclusive and welcoming, because as Francine says, like, not everybody knows that the library is for them, but it is for them.
This may be a somewhat difficult topic, but I remember when the Seattle Public Library was being built, there was a lot of discussion about people who will find warmth in the library. And I don't mean just emotional warmth. I mean people who are homeless on the street who might find that the library is a refuge for that. Did that come into your conversations? I know it was very much in the conversations in Seattle. How to?
Yeah, in a way, it's happening everywhere. For me, for us, it was a bigger discussion, to be honest, in Washington. But here it felt, of course, but in a way, homeless people, for instance, are in all libraries all over the world, and I think the discussion we always had with NYPL, they're part of it, you know, and we want, and it's only the thing, when we started to work on the Washington, the Martin Luther King Memorial Library, it was maybe 50% of the population of the library. That was a little bit much. Yeah. And they were really brought by buses every day there. It was really organized that all homeless were brought to the library. And that's now solved, that it's also more like here in New York, it's part of the whole population. But in a way, I don't know how you did experience it. And of course, we took very much care how we deal with safe toilets and all these kind of pragmatic things. And what should we say more about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just about, you know, honoring the dignity of all people who walk in. It's not something that we felt like we could shirk or avoid. It's a fact of democratic spaces like this. I think we did design the building in a way that, you know, there's a sense of safety and security, and that benefits everybody. Everybody should feel a sense of safety or security when they're in the library. There's a durability to it. You know, there's a lot of people who come in and out of this library, no matter who they are. So I think that there was an acceptance, and if there's any critique of it, it's of the social system that we live in that is not allowing those people who are unhoused to find proper housing and that they have to come to the library. But if they're going to come to the library,
You've created an incredibly dignified space and an incredibly welcoming one.
Yeah.
And I think it's as Tony was saying in the introduction, it's just even, because I knew we were meeting tonight, I've been on multiple days to come and visit just for a short visit, and I always think, I would be the type who would bring my book here to read. I think if I'm early for an appointment, maybe just get off the subway and come here for 20 minutes in between things and enjoy this building. It does look like a place also where the idea that we have in older libraries where maybe it took a while before you found what you needed. You feel that there's an incredible accessibility of information here. I think at some point we're supposed to open up to questions, so maybe given the hour, unless either of you had questions that you wanted to ask me or you something that really you're deeply proud that you were able to achieve here. I guess I have one last question, which is, since this is about a place about learning, what did you, and you've made quite clear that this was a very specific situation to turn a department store, which was never about exciting spaces. It was about selling the most amount of merchandise possible on a rational floor plate, by carving out these spaces, by having that view of the jig between 3 and 5 makes for these very exciting diagonal spaces. So you've created a whole new spatial experience inside a framework, which when you first encounter it, except for the witch's hat, looks like the building that we've always known here. So if it's a place of learning, here's my last tough question, and then we'll really get tough when we go to the public's questions, undoubtedly. What did you learn doing this that you might take away for other projects? I know you both have many things underway, and not only libraries, but what did you learn from this project, reflecting back on it?
Yeah, maybe for me, but I was just thinking, I like to make special tables. So this is for me the New York table, and I made the table from the Log Hall, what is the very famous library now in Tilburg. We make a train table, and so I'm now thinking of how I will make for the Dutch National Bank. I also want to make a table, so I'm into, but I think they bring a kind of identity to a space. It's maybe also that nowadays that often all the furniture comes from maybe 5 companies, so a lot of buildings, all the interior look the same. Yeah, that's not to be unfriendly to somebody, but to give identity in a world of globalization, I think for me is very important. So, and I hope I can continue to do that, also in other places in the world.
I think I learned a lot from Francine.
Oh, yeah, I know. Oh, and I'm from you.
I was walking an architecture critic, who will not be named, through the building after it was finished and before it was open, fully to the public. And that person said, well, you know, that corner is so important, the corner that looks back towards the Stephen A. Schwarzman building. Why didn't you do something heroic there? Something that, you know, why did you take all that energy and put it into the long room? And why couldn't you have done? And I just thought, well, those are the best seats in the house. Like, those are the seats, if I'm going to choose a place to sit, I'm going to sit on any one of those counters, the perimeter counters looking out the window, because like you, I like a good window to look out to, and I don't find it distracting. But the thought that we wouldn't put people where the best place, the best view is, rather than some monument to some architectural idea, I feel like there was an understatement to the design approach and a very people-focused design approach, but created no less astonishing spaces.
That's interesting. It makes me think of several things. One, to go back to a comment probably you both made in one guise or another, that the library is not only showing off books to their greatest advantage. I mean, I think those slides of these, you know, shoulder height bookcases everywhere, and then taking the same number of books and making this very dramatic presentation. But also the users. The users look so much better in this library, and as you say, to come up to the building at the corner and look in, and you're not seeing donuts, you're not seeing, you know, Starbucks coffee, you're seeing people, you're seeing the activity of this library through the windows. The other thing that, unless Manhattan decides it's going to have the Australian system where the traffic light is a three-phase thing, and at one point, all cars stop and people cross the street diagonally. No one is going to come diagonally to that corner. So the corner of a building in the typology of the Manhattan grid is not an entry. The questions are much gentler from the audience. So the first one is, can you speak more about the concept of the library as a third space?
Yeah, I think I told, but also for me, it's important that all people are different, or the many different people. So what you can see that what we did try to do in this library, that there is, in a way, I sometimes say it's different libraries on top of each other. So everybody can find his or her third place, depending on what are your needs, but also be aware that some people are sometimes feel a little bit ashamed to go to a library, or that my language is not good, or I cannot write well. So we want to make it that everybody can find, and other people want to be like, I'm here, I want to sit here, and like we try to give for different kind of people, different, and organize different third places. So it's, and I think that's extremely important for us, because sometimes libraries, if you look at other libraries, that it feels that, I think that this different atmosphere that we did created in a very, we were very convinced of doing that all together, of course, with the whole client team. That makes it really the third place. I think everybody can find here a place where he or she feels comfortable and safe. And so it's also for me very much dealing with sidelines, for instance. So sidelines even for the staff, that they can oversee what's happening. And because that was really not happening in the old Mid-Manhattan library. But it's also, also for people working there, or, it's also a place where maybe you meet somebody who you will marry later or something like that. It's also a kind of, a place where also other things happen, but it's beautiful.
That's really interesting to think about the sightlines, because it's very important for the whole functioning of the library. But this is not a space in which you feel that you're under surveillance at all. And I think in a world in which so many spaces that, let's say, a century ago would have been places to meet publicly either have disappeared because their functions have eroded. People used to meet in the morning at the post office because they were getting their mail or mailing their mail, but now they get their email, so there's no need to go to the post office. People used to go to the bank and wait in line, but now they don't wait. So there are many places where the public gathered in daily activity that have disappeared from our daily lives. I think if somebody is writing a book on Manhattan in this period, perhaps a renaissance of public space, this building and what's happened at Penn Station, which used to be one of the most horrible places one could imagine to have to go, might be, surprisingly enough for New York, a theme. Francine, this all in capital letters, from all your master creations, which one is your favorite? Sophie's choice.
What?
That's not me. That's from.
What is my favorite library?
Your favorite creation.
Oh, I have many kids, yes, and I love them all.
I bet the chat now is filled with people trying to commission a special table from you. So I suppose this is the last question. It's a very uninquisitive group. What other projects, either of you, Liz or Francine, have you done that were similar?
Well, Francine's going to be able to say they're similar in terms of building type. I think that I was thinking about these third places, and what's really interesting is that the libraries aren't only third places, because there's your home and your work, and then the third place that we always talk about. But people are working out of libraries now, probably clock in, at 9 a.m. and clock out at 5 p.m. or whatever it is, and spend their entire days in libraries, particularly in the gig economy, or now that we're all used to working remotely. You could probably, in this library, start your business, write your resume, start your business, advertise it, learn how to market it, and conduct the whole darn thing from out of the library itself. So I think that it's very much, a lot of different things. And to that end, we work a lot on university campuses, and it's a lot about thinking. I just think that working in a library and in this library and thinking about generations like the teens and incorporating that has helped me think about how campus communities work and how students think about spaces to study in, certainly, and whether we're doing libraries or residence halls or student centers, a lot of things that we do. I just feel very much, even at my age, sort of tapped into thinking about how different generations and different ages of people respond to spaces, and how you have to allow for a little bit of magic to happen when the space is built and not over-engineer it and not think that you're going to know exactly how people are going to use spaces. So I think it's just given us a lot more of an ability to think, more about flexibility in creative ways.
I was just thinking, because now we're talking a lot about libraries, but I say I'm specialized in things I've never done before. But what I try to do now, we're also working on quite some musea at this moment, but also the transition and the change that libraries had to make and what's happening. Because also a lot of libraries, not the NYPL, but it was a very old institute. So also how we changed Library of Birmingham, but it's a transition of having an other attitude as a librarian. I think also a lot of musea have to change in their attitude. That it's also welcoming from everybody. That it's not just for elitists. That it's really for everybody. That like what we also did here in New York. So that's something what I'm very much interested in and working on this moment, to get also a more open-minded and more open and welcoming designed, often existing musea. That is in my head now.
One late-breaking question, but I think you were already speaking a bit about this, Liz. I hope I can read this handwriting. About libraries' relevance in the information age. Barry, you talked, it's not a question to me, however. Barry, you talked briefly about the library's position towards technology and the debate that started 30 years ago. Liz and Francine described the building as an open system. Could this project present a resolution to the debate?
I hope it does. I mean, I don't know, I'm not sure there's much of a debate anymore. Haven't we really proven the point of libraries' relevance? If the great projects that are going on now with libraries, where cities and library systems have doubled down on the physical place as an important resource, and the people in it as an important resource, I feel like that debate is over.
That's why I had as a historian to remind us of it, because it turned out to be a false prophecy. And I think
That's right, and we did a whole symposium about that.
Yeah. So, last question. How much of the vision for the future of the library came from the library's leadership, and how much from you? How do you work with, I wonder who wrote this question, how do you work with institutions to create these plans?
Very carefully.
I think we were a great team altogether. It was really, I'm very, very positive, but I also am very positive about the leadership that was taken. I'm very much aware of that.
And it was a complex client group in the best of ways, because we had private funds and we had public funds, and it's a city building and it's a privately, funded building. It was a little bit of everything. We had a working group of trustees who were incredibly dedicated to helping us, think about the future, because if trustees aren't doing that, who aren't, besides the senior leadership as well. So it was a little bit of everything, and it's a dance, and I think we really all danced very well together. And I think that great buildings don't come from bad relationships, you really got to have a good relationship to have a good building. Yeah.
I think we should agree to meet here in in a couple of years. The one architect I've always been very interested in is an architect of great libraries named Henri Labrouste. And he and his friends had a kind of generational fight with their teachers. And at one point they said, we don't think a building is finished until it's at least 20 years old. At that point, the building lives with its society, and the two have kind of finished the construction together. But I think it's off to a really great start here. So thank you for inviting me to join in with everybody else and hear about the project in a nutshell and think about all of its implications. And now we're going to take a world tour of libraries that you've done and answer the questions for ourselves. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. And thank you, Francine and Liz.